roots in red dirt. The summer of 1987 came to Caldwell County, Texas, the way it always did, with a heat so vicious it cracked the earth wide open, like God himself was trying to read what sins lay buried underneath. And in Caldwell County, the sins ran deep. Two families had claimed this corner of Texas since before the Civil War. The Hargroves owned the Northland, 1,200 acres of cattle pasture, 3 oil wells, and a name that opened every door from Austin to El Paso. The Delacroix family owned the South, 800 acres of pecan orchard that stretched for a mile, and a pride so stubborn it made the Texas Longhorns look agreeable. For 3 generations they had coexisted the way rattlesnakes and jackrabbits coexist, through mutual awareness, mutual suspicion, and the quiet understanding that the wrong move by either side could end very badly. That understanding died the day Earl Hargrove drove his black Cadillac down Route 9 and stopped in front of Delacroix Feed and Grain with a briefcase in his hand and a smirk on his face. Earl was 62 years old, barrel-chested, with silver hair slicked back and hands that had shaken the hands of 3 Texas governors. He did not knock on doors. He expected them to open. Raymond Delacroix was 58, lean as a fence post, with dark eyes that had seen drought and flood and the death of 2 sons and still hadn't softened a single degree. He met Earl on the porch. "Earl, none expected. I'll make this quick. The water rights to Soldier Creek run under both our properties. My lawyers tell me the original 1019-21 deed gives the Hargrove family primary claim. I'm prepared to buy your share, $500,000. That's twice what it's worth." Raymond Delacroix looked at the briefcase. He looked at Earl Hargrove. Then he looked out at the horizon, where the pecan trees his grandfather had planted stood in long, dark rows against the burning sky. "Get off my property," Raymond said. "Quiet, final. The way you say something when you have already decided you will never unsay it." Earl Hargrove smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Raymond, I hoped you'd be reasonable. My lawyers will be in touch." "Send them," Raymond said. "I'll be here." What Raymond Delacroix did not know, what none of the Delacroix family knew, was that Earl Hargrove's lawyers had already been to the Caldwell County Courthouse. And someone inside that courthouse, a man named Deputy Clerk Weston Pruitt, had accepted an envelope containing $11,000 in cash, and in exchange had made certain documents very difficult to find. The legal battle began that autumn. It would last 4 years. It would cost Raymond Delacroix $400,000 in legal fees. And in the spring of 1991, a Caldwell County judge, a man who golfed with Earl Hargrove every 3rd Saturday, ruled in favor of the Hargrove family. Raymond Delacroix lost the water rights to Soldier Creek. Without that water, the pecan orchard began to die. Within 18 months, Raymond Delacroix had a stroke. He survived. But when he came home from the hospital, he sat in his wooden chair on the porch and looked at his dying trees, and something behind his eyes went permanently dark. He lived another 7 years in that chair, watching the orchard turn gray and skeletal, watching the land his grandfather had broken his back to build slowly surrender to the Texas sun. He died in 1999, with his daughter Lena holding one hand and the deed to his property clutched in the other. Lena Delacroix was 31 years old when her father died. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's French Creole cheekbones, and she had something neither of her parents had fully possessed, a patience so cold and so complete, it was almost surgical. She stood over her father's grave on a Tuesday in October, the wind pulling at the black dress she wore, and she made a promise to the red Texas dirt. Not today, not tomorrow, but the debt will be paid. Part 2. The Next Generation. 12 years passed. Lena Delacroix did not waste them. While the Hargroves assumed she had been beaten, while Earl Hargrove drove his black Cadillac past the Delacroix property and watched the dead trees with satisfaction, Lena was building. She finished her law degree at the University of Texas. She took a job at a firm in San Antonio and spent 7 years learning exactly how the powerful protect themselves. She saved, she studied, she made quiet friends in quiet places, she documented everything, and she waited. In 2007, Earl Hargrove died of a heart attack at the Caldwell County Country Club, face down in a plate of prime rib, which many people said was exactly the death he deserved. His son, Preston Hargrove, inherited everything. Preston was 40 years old, tall and handsome in the way that men who have never suffered tend to be, smooth, easy, careless. He had his father's arrogance, but none of his father's cunning. Where Earl had been a rattlesnake, Preston was a peacock. He drove a newer Cadillac, white this time, and spent considerable amounts of the Hargrove fortune entertaining at the ranch, throwing parties, making bad investments, and generally behaving like a man who believed money was a permanent condition rather than something that required maintenance. He also had a son. Cole Hargrove was 19 in 2007, studying business at Texas A&M, and he was, and this is important, nothing like his father or his grandfather. Cole had his mother's conscience, which is to say, he had a conscience, which made him something of an anomaly in the Hargrove bloodline. He knew the history between the families. It troubled him in the way that inherited guilt troubles people who are decent, but not yet brave enough to do anything about it. That year, at a 4th of July gathering in Lockhart, Cole Hargrove met Lena Delacroix. Marisol was Lena's younger cousin, 22, studying agriculture at UT, with the kind of laugh that rearranged the air in a room. She knew exactly who Cole Hargrove was. She had grown up hearing the story of what his family had done to hers. She had fully intended to ignore him. She did not ignore him. They talked for 3 hours under a string of lights while fireworks cracked the sky open overhead. They disagreed about almost everything. They agreed on the things that mattered. By the end of the night, Cole Hargrove had asked for her phone number, and Lena Delacroix had given it to him. And both of them knew they had crossed some kind of line that other people were going to make very complicated. They were right about that. Part 3. Fire and Water. When Lena Delacroix found out her cousin was seeing Cole Hargrove, she drove to Marisol's apartment in Austin and sat across from her at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't touch, and explained, in very measured terms, why this was a catastrophic mistake. Marisol listened. Then she said, "Lena, he's not his grandfather. He has his grandfather's name on a deed that stole our water. That's not the same as being his grandfather." Lena drove home in silence. She did not forbid it. Lena Delacroix was many things, but she was not a fool, and she understood that forbidding something to someone with Delacroix blood was the surest way to make them do it twice as hard. But she filed the information away. She adjusted her plans, because Lena, above all things, was adaptable. Meanwhile, Preston Hargrove was having problems. The bad investments had accumulated. The parties had been expensive. The oil wells, 2 of the original 3 had run dry, and the 3rd was producing a fraction of its earlier yield. Preston had borrowed against the land. He had borrowed against the mineral rights. He had made a particularly catastrophic bet on a chain of Texas roadhouses that had gone bankrupt in 2009, taking with them approximately $2.3 million of Hargrove money. By 2011, Preston Hargrove was quietly, desperately, trying to find a buyer for a portion of the Hargrove land, the southern parcel, the one that bordered the Delacroix property. He did not advertise this. He was too proud for that. But Caldwell County is not a large place, and Lena Delacroix had spent 12 years cultivating sources of information, and when the news reached her, carried by a real estate agent named Dot Humphreys, who owed Lena a favor, Lena set down her coffee cup, allowed herself one small, cold smile, and picked up the telephone. She called a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch was a property developer out of Houston, large, loud, and relentlessly cheerful, who had been trying for 3 years to get Lena's approval to develop a corner of the Delacroix land into a rural resort property. Lena had strung him along with just enough interest to keep him attentive. "Gerald," she said, "I need you to make an offer on some land, and I need you to do it without my name being anywhere near the transaction." "Now, Lena, what kind of land are we talking about?" "Hargrove land. Southern parcel. 600 acres. There was a pause. "That's Hargrove land, Lena." "It is right now," she said. "It won't be for long." Gerald Fitch, with a shell company Lena had helped him structure, made an offer. Preston Hargrove, bleeding money from 7 directions at once, accepted. And the 600 acres of southern Hargrove land, including, critically, the section of land that sat directly above the eastern branch of Soldier Creek, changed hands. Then Gerald Fitch, honoring the agreement he and Lena had made, sold the parcel to the Delacroix Family Land Trust for exactly what he paid for it, plus a very reasonable development fee. The Delacroix family now owned land on both sides of the water that had been stolen from them 20 years before. Lena hired the best water rights attorney in Texas. She filed suit in federal court, citing new geological surveys, the fraudulent manipulation of the original 11921 deed, and evidence, carefully assembled over a decade, of the payment made to Deputy Clerk Weston Pruitt in 1991. Weston Pruitt, now 73 and living in a retirement community in San Marcos, received a visit from federal investigators in March of 2012. He confessed before they finished their first cup of his wife's coffee. Part 4, The Reckoning. Before we go further, if this story is already getting under your skin, if you can feel the red dirt and the heat and the cold slow burn of 20 years of patience finally catching fire, you're exactly where Cold Reckoning wants you. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, because every story we tell is like this one, true in the ways that matter, sharp as a bailing hook, and never finished until justice finds its way home. Now, back to Texas. The lawsuit detonated through Caldwell County like a slow-motion explosion. Preston Hargrove, when he learned what had happened, when his own lawyers explained the chain of transactions, the federal fraud charges tied to his father's manipulation of the original deed, the potential clawback of assets connected to the original stolen water rights, sat in his study for a long moment, and then he swept everything off his desk with one arm. Lamp, family photos, crystal whiskey decanter, all of it to the floor. He called his lawyer. He called his banker. He called his second cousin, who served on the Caldwell County Commission. And then, when none of those calls produced the results he wanted, he called Cole. "You need to end this thing with that Delacroix girl," Preston told his son. Cole was sitting in his apartment in College Station. He was 24 years old, and he had known this conversation was coming for 2 years, and he had spent those 2 years quietly deciding what he was going to say when it arrived. "No," Cole said. "Excuse me? No, Dad, I won't." The silence on the line was the kind that has texture to it. "Cole, that family is destroying us. That woman's father died watching his land die because your father cheated him out of his water. I looked it up, Dad. I read the original lawsuit. I read the deed. Grandpa paid someone to hide documents. That's a fact. That is none of your business. It's all of our business. It's our name on it." Cole took a breath. "I'm not ending anything with Marisol. And honestly, Dad, I think you should settle." Preston Hargrove did not speak to his son for 4 months after that call. The federal case moved forward. In October of 2012, a federal judge issued a preliminary ruling. The 1987 water rights judgment was vacated. The manipulation of court documents constituted fraud upon the court. The Delacroix family's claim to shared water rights from Soldier Creek was reinstated, with damages. The damages were not small. By the time the dust settled, by the time the appeals were exhausted and the final judgment was entered in the spring of 2014, Preston Hargrove owed the Delacroix family trust $4.1 million. He did not have $4.1 million. He had the north pasture, the main house, one functioning oil well, and a pride that had outlasted everything else by sheer stubbornness. He paid what he could. He sold the cattle. He sold the antique collection his mother had spent 40 years building. He sold the mineral rights to a drilling company out of Midland. And on a cold morning in February of 2015, Lena Delacroix stood at the window of her office in Lockhart and watched a truck pull away from the Hargrove property, carrying the last of the herd. She felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something quieter, something that was almost like grief, but not for the Hargroves, for the years, for her father in that chair, for the pecan trees that were just now, slowly beginning to come back. She had spent 3 years replanting, irrigating with the water that was now rightfully hers, for all the time that the bitterness had taken and could never give back. She sat down at her desk and let herself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work, because Lena Delacroix had always known that revenge was not a destination. It was just a door that swung back open to the rest of your life. Part 5. What Grows Back. The Delacroix pecan orchard, by 2018, had 300 mature trees, producing again. The replanted sections were younger, thinner, but healthy. A journalist from Texas Monthly came out and wrote a piece about the orchard's recovery, about heritage agriculture, about the complicated history of land in Texas. He did not fully understand what he was writing about, but the photographs were beautiful. Lena was 50 years old. She had lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a decade ago, and she moved through the world with the particular authority of someone who has survived a very long fight and come out the other side. She had not married. She had not particularly wanted to. She had the land and the trees and a border collie named Justice who followed her everywhere, and she considered herself, on balance, a fortunate woman. Cole Hargrove and Marisol Delacroix were married in 2016. The wedding was held at the Delacroix property, under the pecan trees in the afternoon light of a Texas October. It was not a large wedding. The Hargrove side was thin. Preston did not attend, and the Delacroix side was complicated by the weight of history that everyone pretended not to feel. But Lena was there. She sat in the front row in a deep green dress and watched her cousin marry the grandson of the man who had tried to destroy their family. And she thought about the strangeness of the world, the way time bends things into shapes you never could have predicted. When Cole came to her before the ceremony, nervous, young, genuine, and said, "Miss Delacroix, I know that what my family did," she stopped him. "Cole," she said, "I know you know. That's enough." She straightened his tie with 2 fingers. "Take care of her." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Always." She believed him. E-Pile, red, dirt, and reckoning. Preston Hargrove sold the main house in 2019. He moved to a modest place outside of Luling. 2 bedrooms, a gas station down the road, no view of anything that used to belong to him. He was not a sympathetic figure, and the county did not treat him as one. But he was old now and tired, and something in him had been broken open by the years, the loss, the conversation with his son that he had never fully repaired. He started going to church again. Not the big First Baptist in Lockhart where the Hargroves had always gone, where the pews remembered the weight of their family name. A small congregation outside of town, in a building that used to be a feed store. He sat in the back and didn't speak much. One Sunday, he arrived early and found Lena Delacroix already there. She looked at him. He looked at her. The history between them, 25 years of courts and lawyers and water and grief, and dead trees and a stroke that stole 7 years from her father, stood in the air between them like a physical thing. Preston Hargrove nodded, a small nod, the smallest nod available to a man his size. Lena Delacroix returned it, equally small, equally final. They sat on opposite sides of the room and did not speak. They would never be at peace. You cannot pour 25 years of damage into a single nod. But there was something in that moment, some acknowledgement, however tiny, that they had both paid enormous costs for the sins of one greedy man with a briefcase on a summer day in 1987, and that paying those costs had not left either of them entirely whole. The service began. Outside, the Texas sky was enormous and indifferent, the way it always is, blue and boundless and utterly unimpressed by human drama. The red dirt remembered everything. The pecan trees grew on. Cole and Marisol Hargrove, she kept her name too. They compromised and hyphenated their children's. Bought a small house on the edge of the Delacroix property in 2020. Their daughter, Lena Josephine Hargrove Delacroix, was born in April of that year during a thunderstorm that rattled every window in the county. Lena held that baby and felt the weight of her, small and furious and new, and understood something she had spent 20 years being too angry to understand. That the point was never to win. The point was to still be standing, still be building, still be planting trees whose shade you might not live to sit under. Her father had known that. He had just been robbed of the chance to act on it. She was not robbed. She was still here. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and whispered the family name, the full name, both halves of it, and the child grabbed her finger and held on with a strength that seemed improbable for something that small. Lena Delacroix, for the first time in a very long time, laughed. Outside, along the fence line where the Delacroix property met the land that used to be Hargrove and was now something new, something shared. The water from Soldier Creek ran clear and cold under the August heat. It had always run that way. It always would. The earth keeps its accounts. And in Texas, as anywhere, what is taken always, always finds its way back. Cold reckoning. Real stories, real reckoning, real justice.